Okay, hi everyone, and welcome to my PowerPoint presentation for music therapy and veterans with post-traumatic stress disorder. I'm sorry, here we go. Okay, so first thing is just a quick look at veterans and PTSD, the statistics that are out there, and that kind of basic information. And so starting off, at least 20% of Iraq and Afghanistan veterans have PTSD. 7% of veterans have PTSD and traumatic brain injury. So some of them have a dual diagnosis. That's actually a little more common than I thought, and traumatic brain injury isn't something I know much about, but that is something that I read a little bit about throughout my research. And the rate of PTSD diagnoses for Iraq and Afghanistan and those conflicts that we've had there in the past few years, they are greater than any other prior conflict. And I found that maybe a little bit surprising. I thought maybe Vietnam would have the most PTSD diagnoses, but it's possible that maybe it wasn't as well formed. The diagnosis of PTSD wasn't as well formed at that time. I'm not really sure. That's just speculation. But there's also the PTSD diagnoses distribution. And so when you break down each branch of the military, the Army has the most diagnoses of PTSD. And I wasn't really surprised by that fact. When you think about it, the people in the Army, they're the ones that are going to be doing more groundwork and more combat. And so it's not very surprising that they would be the ones to have more traumatic events happen. For instance, like my dad being a pilot, he's flying up in the air above everything else. And so he's not as prone, I guess you would say, to being involved in a traumatic experience. And then another statistic that I, again, did not find very surprising was that 50% of those that are diagnosed with PTSD do not seek treatment. And again, this is probably speculation, but I would say it's because of the stigma of not wanting to seek help and thinking that it's just something that you'll get over and you can power through. It's not a big deal. Of course, that is speculation, but that is what seems to be the case. And the reason that I chose this population is because of my personal background. My dad being in the Air Force for 25 plus years, and as I kind of mentioned, he does not have PTSD, but I realized how easy it could have been for that to happen to him. And so I'm very grateful that he doesn't have that diagnosis. Now, it is without a doubt that he came back slightly different and changed from that experience of serving in a war zone for a year. I think it would be impossible to come back from that and not be affected in some way, shape, or form. The other reason I chose this population is because there's a growing number of people returning to the U.S. and being diagnosed with PTSD. And because of that, the research and the need for treatment continues to grow. So I think it would be very interesting and exciting to be getting in on the ground floor of this research. Sorry, I'm trying to see if I missed something. Okay, so diagnosis. Post-traumatic stress disorder is an anxiety disorder that is caused by a traumatic event. Such events include combat, assault, sexual abuse, physical abuse, natural disasters, and accidents. So, of course, in this situation, we would be talking about combat, but we could also be talking about maybe in some cases assault, and how it is unfortunate that sexual assault is common in the military, and so that could be another reason that people in the military have PTSD. Problems associated with PTSD are substance abuse, feeling shame and hopelessness, employment difficulties, and relationship adjustment issues. And the symptoms of PTSD are divided into 4 different types. There's reliving the traumatic event, which is the one that I hear about most. Avoiding situations that remind the person of the event, feeling dissociated with society, and feeling tension. Now, the traditional treatments are exposure treatment, cognitive approaches, and behavioral family therapy. Now, exposure treatment is basically exactly what it sounds like. It's exposing the person to the traumatic event within a contained environment, which I can see how that would be effective, but that just sounds terrifying. And the research I found proved that that is the most successful method of treatment, and so that is used a good bit. And then, of course, cognitive approaches and behavioral family therapy. And then there are other treatments that might not be as common, such as music therapy, but some other treatments that I came across were relaxation, acupuncture, meditation, yoga, and dog therapy. And the yoga therapy, I can see that being so useful, but it's funny to imagine all of these airmen and servicemen and women doing yoga together. But the dog therapy is one that I don't actually have a true source for that. This is something that I actually saw a segment on the Today Show about this. And it's really interesting the way that they are using dogs as a companion for these people. And it's really interesting to watch. If anybody's interested in watching that video clip, I can track that down and send that to anyone who's interested. Now, the treatment goals for someone who has PTSD, the first thing would be coping skills, just coping with this traumatic event and learning how to manage reliving that tragic or traumatic event. And then also stress management skills, community reintegration, which that's another big thing, like even family reintegration, a family member having to deal with the fact that their loved one is in a very vulnerable state, and it's something that both people would have to really learn to cope with. Some other treatment goals are to increase awareness and insight of self and others, improve overall cognition and neurological functioning, nonverbal means of self-expression, which I'll get into a little bit more of that later. Obviously with music, that's going to be a big thing. And then sensory stimulation, which is also going to be a big thing with music. The medications that are typically used, we've got selective reuptake inhibitors, we've got antidepressants, and mood stabilizers, which are all things that I would kind of imagine them using for someone who has PTSD. But what's interesting about the medications is that they usually just provide symptom reduction, but not elimination. So that would maybe be something that's part of a treatment process, is prescribing one of these medications along with certain types of therapy. Now, getting into the actual music therapy part, music therapists provide services to military personnel, their families, as well as veterans. These music therapists work on military installations, VA healthcare communities, and also in the community. And for me personally, I love the idea of working with current members of the military who are currently serving and working with their families. And as this next point mentions, music therapy programs can be used during pre-mobilization, so before someone is about to be deployed, during deployment, post-deployment, and recovery as it pertains to injury. It can also be used with families of fallen service personnel. And that's what really appeals to me, is working with the current service member as well as their family and helping everyone as a family unit learn to cope with this new life, maybe, or just learning how to help their family member who has been changed and impacted by this traumatic event. That's something that really appeals to me. And some common methods that I saw in my research when it comes to music therapy is rhythm-based exercises, such as a drum circle. One of the ones that I read was something that took place at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Tucson, Arizona. And that's actually a base that my dad and all of us were stationed at when I was in high school. I graduated in Tucson. So it was really cool to read about music therapy taking place at that Air Force Base. That was just absolutely amazing to me. But one that they used there was a drum circle, and it was just the feedback from people doing that drum circle was absolutely amazing. And there's also interactive tasks, so like being a part of a performing group. And there are also a lot of veterans performing groups that aren't necessarily music therapy, but they are specifically there for that purpose of having some sort of interactive task and community integration. One very popular organization is Guitars for Vets. Some other common methods would be songwriting, lyric interpretations. There's some instances of integrated therapy, such as using art therapy or creative writing or drama therapy. There's also active listening, which can be used to comfort or stimulate the senses, which goes back to a treatment goal of sensory stimulation. And there's guided imagery and music, and then improvisation. And the improvisation kind of goes back to the drum circle, where there can just be like a 10 minutes of just banging away on a drum, and it can be an improvised method. And so here are some active duty models that I saw. Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. What was so funny about this is that I did not even know that this existed. And when I looked at the dates from this, what they called it was a drop-in session with music therapists that came into the base, that took place at the time that we were living in Tucson. And I had no idea that it was taking place. And my dad was actually the wing commander at that base, which means that he was the base commander. He was in charge of the base. And so I told him about that, and he had no idea either. I mean, he had no idea that there was any music therapy taking place on that base. But I'm so glad that that is happening there, and I'm sure that there are probably other Air Force bases and Army posts that are also using music therapy on their installation. Some others were Resounding Joy Incorporated in San Diego, the National Intrepid Center of Excellence in Bethesda, Maryland, the Walter Reed National Military Medical Center, and also in Bethesda, Maryland, or is it Baltimore? I think it might be Baltimore. And the Institute for Therapy Through the Arts, which is the Music Institute of Chicago. And the Walter Reed Medical Center is the one that first comes to my mind, and there is a certified music therapist working there. And if I remember correctly, I believe she's a graduate of SMWC, so I thought that was really cool. And then here are the references. And so I thank you very much for listening, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.